Hi friends, Krista here. Thank you so much for stopping by Books and Jams. We're about halfway through 2021, which just kind of blows my mind. But because of that, I'm going to be doing the mid-year book freakout tag. I have already read just over 100 books this year. What? That is amazing in and of itself. But I have a lot of books that I've been talking about in the last 6 months, and I always love this tag as a way to kind of look back and reflect on my reading year so far. So let's just jump right in. There are 13 questions, but we start right off with a bang with what is your favorite book that you've read so far in 2021. I am going to do a video where I talk about all of my 5-star reads so far this year and maybe a couple of my top favorites because there are quite a few. I've read some fantastic books this year, but as I looked through my list of what I've read, as I scrolled through Goodreads, 2 stood out to me. And if you asked me tomorrow, 2 different ones might stand out to me, but as of today, I would say Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis was most definitely a favorite so far this year. Nonfiction, Christian fiction, and doing Mere Christianity May with so many of you and a handful of other booktubers really was special to me, and I feel like I gleaned so much more from this book because of that reading experience. This was a phenomenal book. C.S. Lewis is just a brilliant man, and I loved it. So good. And then another one that I read early in January, but it just stands out to me as one that I really loved. I mean, you're going to be hearing about a lot of other books that I loved as well, but This Tender Land by William Kent Kruger was my first buddy read with my patron group, which I started in January, and this was our first book that we read together. So it's special because of that, but also I just think it was so good. I really loved it. The story of these boys traveling down the river together, the history that's involved as far as homes or schools for Indigenous children and how awful those were, and learning the real history behind that. This book just had so much that I really loved, and for that reason, it's among one of my favorites this year. Number 2 is the best sequel that you read this year. I didn't make a list of all the sequels I read this year, but as I was looking through, this one stands out to me. This is book 8, maybe, or 9 in the Three Pines mystery series, the Armand Gamache mystery series by Louise Penny. The Beautiful Mystery. This one stands out because it doesn't take place in the town of Three Pines like so many of the other books. It takes place at a very secluded monastery, and music, like the history of Gregorian chant, is a part of this story, and it just felt very special to me, and I absolutely loved it. It's among my favorite in the series so far, and definitely the sequel that I enjoyed the most so far this year. Number 3 is a new release that you haven't read yet, but that you want to. I went to the library yesterday to pick up this book, and they were closed. I was so bummed. But the new release I'm really excited to pick up, the newest one coming into my home, is going to be Anne of Manhattan by Brianna Starler. And this is an Anne of Green Gables retelling set in New York City. And I'm just really excited for it. I think it's going to be cute and fun. Hopefully, my fingers are crossed that I'm going to love it. I don't usually pay attention to new releases and what's coming out, but I am doing that this year with my anticipated reads videos series that I'm doing. And so there's a whole bunch of other ones that I haven't yet gotten to that you can watch those videos and find out. But Anne of Manhattan is going to be the newest new release that comes into my home, and I'm so excited. It feels like a good summertime type of a read. We'll see. We'll see. Number 4 is most anticipated releases for the second half of the year, and I haven't looked beyond September at this point, so I will highlight one of the ones I just talked about in my most recent anticipated reads video, and that is Forest of Vanishing Stars by Kristen Harmel. I just recently read the Book of Lost Names by her and absolutely loved it, so I'm really excited about another book coming out by her, and it comes out very soon, July 6th. It's a World War II story about a young German girl who gets kidnapped and brought kind of out into the wilderness, but then the person who kidnapped her dies or something, and she's kind of stranded and trying to survive. She comes across a group of Jewish young people, I'm not sure, who are also trying to escape, and they kind of work together, and then something happens from there. I just am really excited about another Kristen Harmel book. I really loved her writing and the story in the Book of Lost Names. And so, I have a couple of her older backlist books on my shelf too, but that's one that's coming out very soon that I'm really looking forward to. Number 5 is your biggest disappointment so far. And I've had a couple. I've had a couple disappointments. Mainly, I would say my biggest disappointment for sure was The Brave by James Bird. This was our group pick for middle grade March. And unfortunately, it was a bit of a miss for most people. I think there was a handful of people who really liked it. There were definitely things about it that were great, but it was a disappointment in that I was really, really hoping to love it. The cover is stunning and it had a lot of potential, but I think if it were marketed as a YA, that would have been better, but it was passed as a middle grade book and it just didn't. I feel like some of the themes and some of the scenes would have just suited better for a YA book. But it was a little bit of a disappointment, bit of a disappointment for me. And then a more recent disappointment is The Garden of Small Beginnings by Abby Waxman. This cover is so much fun. This book was not fun for me at all. I really didn't like it. This was chosen as a patron book club read for May. And it had such potential. A young single mom grieving the loss of her husband, working through that grief, becomes a part of this gardening group class and meets all of these other quirky kind of characters and learns about her grief and how to move forward. And it just sounded like it should be such a good book, but I really did not get on well with the writing style, the language and the tone and the sexual innuendos and the blatant sexual talk. Like, it just didn't seem to fit with the story. I don't know. I was really kind of bummed. I was really, really bummed. So this was another big disappointment for me. Number 6 is what was your biggest surprise of the year? And unfortunately, my surprise is another kind of disappointment. Like, it was a bummer for me because I really expected to love these books, and I'm going to talk about a series. The first one I actually read in, I think, December, and then I finished the series at the very beginning of the year. And it's by a beloved author of mine, Ella Montgomery. And sadly, I'm talking about the Emily books, and that's Emily of New Moon, Emily Climbs, and Emily's Quest. Now, I know there are people who love the Emily books even more than the Anne books, which I get. Like, Emily is a little bit maybe more realistic, not quite maybe as imaginative and whimsical as Anne is, a little more serious, a little more heavy at times. However, there was one storyline in here that I just absolutely could not get behind. There's one character who expresses interest in Emily and it just feels incredibly inappropriate to me. And that is slightly introduced in the first book. So I enjoyed the first one. And there are parts that I really loved in the second two, but that storyline really pulled this series down for me. And when I think about this series, that is what I think about. And that's such a bummer. And so it's a surprise because Ella Montgomery is one of my favorite authors, but I'm not getting rid of them, but I was definitely bummed. So it's kind of an extension of the disappointed question, but it was a surprise to me because I fully expected and hoped to love these books. And sadly, I didn't. Number 7 is a new favorite author, or new to you favorite author. So this author is not a debut author this year, but I have discovered her this year and I've read 2 of her books so far. And that is Amy Harmon. I recently read Where the Lost Wander, and a month before that I read From Sand and Ash, and I still am going to read What the Wind Knows very soon. But Amy Harmon, after reading this one, I determined that she's a favorite author. She's definitely a favorite of the year for me so far. This one, From Sand and Ash, is a World War II historical novel about a young woman and a young man in Italy. One of them is Catholic and one is Jewish, and their friendship and turn into their romance. It's fantastic. This one is totally different. It takes place in America in the 1800s, in the mid 1800s, and this family is headed west on the Oregon Trail, and their oldest daughter is a young widow, and she begins a relationship with a young half Pawnee man who is part of their wagon train. And it's just fantastic. And it deals with some heavy duty issues. Man, the prologue of this, or the opening scene, is one of the most brutal, captivating scenes that I've read in such a long time. It was shocking. And then we kind of go back and figure out how we got to that point. Like, whoa, fabulous, fabulous. I love when I finish a book and I'm like, easy 5 stars. This was an easy, no questions asked. So many times I hem and haw over what I'm going to rate a book. I love it when a book is just easily a 5-star read. Number 8 is a new fictional crush, and I'm not somebody who gets fictional crushes. I did love John Lowry in this one, the young man that that Naomi has a relationship with, and he is kind and patient and helpful and smart, and I really, like, as we got to know him more and more, I really liked him more and more, and I loved seeing his struggle with identity and where does he belong, being half Native American and half white. I just loved him. I fell in love with his character. I loved Naomi too, so I was so glad with watching their relationship develop and blossom. But I love John Lowry. So if I were younger and had crushes on characters, he might be one, because he was really cool. Number 9 is your newest favorite character, and I'm going to choose someone who is so much like me, and I just talked about her in my mid-month June wrap-up, and that is Miss Pettigrew from Miss Pettigrew Lives for a Day. This book was such a delight to me. Miss Pettigrew is a 40-something preacher's daughter who is a governess and perpetually single, has never been married, and doesn't have children of her own. And like, hello mirror, let me look at you because you are me. But throughout the course of this day, Miss Pettigrew just opens her hands to whatever adventures are coming her way, and she's just willing for life to happen to her. And I loved that about her. I loved the wisdom that she shared with other people. I loved the way that she interacted. I loved the way that she connected with people who were so different from her and like built friendships in the course of this day. I just thought she was fantastic. I really, really loved Miss Pettigrew. So she's one of my new favorite characters for sure. Number 10 is a book that made you cry. And I have a gazillion because I cry so easily in books. I already talked about Where the Lost Wander a lot. This one definitely made me cry. This Tender Land, I cried for sure in that one. Kristen Hanna, Turn on the Waterworks. She always makes me cry. Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry, I read during middle grade March. That one made me cry. The Children's Blizzard by Melanie Benjamin made me cry. The Sound of Gravel, a memoir about a polygamous religious group in Mexico. That one made me cry. Finding Langston and Leaving Lyman by Lisa Cross-Smith. I think that's her name. Those both made me cry. Let's just be honest. So many books make me cry. Number 11 is a book that made you happy. And I'm going to talk about a series here because I have been absolutely loving the Bridgerton series by Julia Quinn. It starts with The Duke and I, which was then adapted into a Netflix show, which I watched first. I never had a desire to read these books. I had heard a couple people talk about them, but they were never really ones that I just needed to get out and read. But I watched the show and loved the show. And so I'm like, you know what? Let me just read the book. And I read it, and then I read book 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. I have one left to go. In the last 3 months, I have flown through these books. They have just made me so happy. They are on the lighter side. They are happy endings. They have fabulous banter set in a historical setting. I just really enjoy them. Do I have to skip through a little bit of steamy scenes every once in a while? Sure. Is the whole book filled with steamy scenes? No, it's really not. So for those of you who don't read a lot of romance like me, these might be fun. And if you listen to them on audio, you can just skip ahead or like flip the page. You don't have to read all the steamy stuff if you don't want to. I really enjoy them. I think the writing is great. The stories are fun. And they have brought me a lot of joy. So that's a book that makes me happy. It's a book series that makes me happy. Number 12 is the most beautiful book that you have bought or acquired this year. And that's hard. I don't keep track of what I bring in or what comes to me every year. I should probably start keeping a list of my newer books, but I do know that this one was a book of the month in March. I read it early because I had a NetGalley for it, and this was in my winter anticipated reads, and then it was a book of the month. So I was so thrilled. I hope you can see it's a little bit shimmery and the flowers on there. I just think this is a beautiful cover. I really love it. It's kind of simple, but it's very pretty. So I'm just going to say that that's one of the most beautiful books that I've acquired this year. The last question is number 13. What book do you need to finish before the end of the year? Any. Take your pick. But I did pick one because this is a huge one. And it's actually a reread for me, but there is a group who's going to be reading this over the next few months, and I'm going to be participating, and that is Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. Yikes. I repurchased this mass market paperback because this is how I originally read it in this version. I took this with me to England when I was fresh out of college, went on a trip with my friend for a month. We went to England and Scotland and Belgium and Luxembourg and Wales, and I didn't fully appreciate that trip, but I do remember that this was the only book I brought with me, and I read it during that trip. And so this is how I'm going to read it again. It's going to be hard because I'm older and that print is tiny, but there's a group who's reading it and it's divided out. So it's about 100 pages a week, I think. Yikes. But this is a book that I would like to finish before the end of 2021, along with a gazillion others, but that's the one I wanted to include. So that is it for the mid-year book freakout tag. I'm so pleased with my reading so far this year. I'm proud of myself and also kind of surprised at how much I've been reading. Maybe it'll slow down towards the end of the year and maybe not. Is this going to be the first year where I get over 200 books? I don't know. I'm not aiming for that. I never aim for a number. I just read because I love reading. So we shall see. We'll see together. You guys know I love chatting with you down in the comments. So I would love to hear from you a book that made you happy. I love hearing about books that make people happy, and maybe I'll add a couple of those to my TBR because I love books that make me happy. It's easy for me to find books that make me cry. I read a lot of historical fiction, and frankly, those stories are often sad. So I cry a lot in books, but I would like to learn some more books that make you happy, that bring joy to your face, that make you hug them when you're done. Let me know what book has made you happy this year, or series, if you're like me. So that is all for today. I hope that you enjoyed this video. Please give it a big thumbs up if you did. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I will be talking to you in another video very soon. Bye.